A pleasure to meet all at last, and welcome back once again to HJN Super Graphics. So of course, while this sub-series in HJN Season 4 is still ongoing, that's because there's just a lot of games for me to cover here. A lot that I've played in a little more than 3 years since the last time I did HJN Graphics. But wouldn't you know, I might actually consider going even further into the world of gaming and giving my own perspective on certain titles here and there that I played, both old and new, of course. But that's a topic that could be saved for an entirely different series here on this channel, one that might not even correlate to HJN entirely. So of course, with number 2608, it's quite possible that we're going to have to delve even further into other games that I might as well start covering now. Other franchises that I hadn't already talked about. And this one, of course, does bring about the fact that Ubisoft's The Crew hadn't really been talked about very much. I will say that The Crew Motorfest was a great new way to give us a more original concept. While it did give us a nice contemporary racing feel in the first two The Crew titles, Motorfest played up the idea of going to Hawaii and racing around in many ways you would never experience before. However, there is a certain other series. This one does correlate to more realistic racing, kind of like Gran Turismo, but this is in fact something made by the famous English software company known as Codemasters. You might already remember Codemasters' unique aura when it came to racing games. They were already famous for creating the F1 series racing games, which I have played before a few different times. But one such series that I hadn't really gotten to know about all too well until more recently is known as Project Cars. And it's kind of appropriate that I do talk a bit about Project Cars here because, after all, as of late 2023, there was the supposed news/announcement for a supposed Project Cars 4, which would have been a PS5 exclusive. And while it could have been a good opportunity for me to even feature it as a first impression sort of scenario for another series of mine on this channel, it unfortunately never happened. Project Cars 4 seemingly is something that's just going to not come around. And I don't know if it's going to be for the best or whatnot, but you know what? One thing I might as well say is that the Project Cars series is a pretty good way of giving us a more realistic feel on how to actually drive around certain tracks. It could be anything. I mean, you got Yokohama, you got the Nürburgring, you got a multitude of different tracks. Realistic ones, that is. Ones that have been known all over the world. In this instance though, Codemasters as well as Bandai Namco have basically come together in a great new way here. And in the year 2020, it seemed that they were able to deliver. And just think, Bandai Namco was already pretty busy in 2020. I mean, look at Dark Pictures' Little Hope and Dragon Ball Z Kakarot. Those were two other games made by the same company. And now we got Project Cars 3. So, 2020, busy year for these guys at Bandai Namco. Any way you look at it though, Project Cars 3 is pretty much going to be the only other thing that we have left to remember Codemasters with. Unless of course we're willing to go further into the world of F1, which is still ongoing by the way. I could talk about F1 25 by any means, but maybe I'd have to wait for some other time to be able to even come close to talking about that series. So, in any case, let's get started here. Project Cars 3 takes us to the realistic realm of racing, real-life racing, that of which contains a number of different challenges. One of the most recurring challenges here is mastering corners. This was a feat that we didn't necessarily get in Gran Turismo, and while Gran Turismo does give us a line that helps us to accurately judge and coordinate our turning measures and acceleration in order to get the best lap times possible, Project Cars 3 takes it one step further and allows for XP gauges to fill up. Not just from good overtakes, clean racing, good laps, beating previous records, mastering corners and all that. But the XP will also fill up with a plentiful multitude of bonuses. And of course, while mastering the curves is a recurring feature that happens in every race you go in, from the street level of racing, Road E, D, C, B, and A, to the GT series, the Hypercar series, and of course the Invitationals, Challenges, and bonus rounds known as DLC rounds. So this game is certainly stacked when it comes to all the possibilities of road racing or track racing by any means. It does put you at first at a pretty good realm of which that you can play as various older cars, many of which delve from the 80s and 90s. But starting at Road E, it does allow you to get a good impression of how to control the cars just right. You do get similar control schemes as you would with other racing games, like R2 to gas, L2 to brake, the left stick controls your steering, right stick controls the camera, and then of course you can use L1 in Project Cars 3 to change camera perspectives. They can go from the inside to the top, to the dash, to the hood, to the bumper, or of course the classic behind the car perspective, simply known as follow, which is a standard fare for almost all racing games, as that is the best way to determine what's ahead of you and see what's coming up. In any case though, going from Road E to Road D to Road C to Road B to Road A, then the GT series, GT Open, Hypercar, and everything else. It certainly is a good multitude of different challenges. Each and every race that you put in, you have up to 3 different objectives. Clear all of them and you can get a hefty bonus of XP. It also can sometimes allow you to unlock additional points, or additional races or events, or even categories within the same series. For Road E, for example, there's 4 different categories of racing. You have one in particular which does allow for specific cars to be put in, like cars from the 80s or 90s. One can have exclusively Hondas, one can exclusively have cars with a certain amount of points to them. And there's even some races which only in fact allow one car in particular to take place. And this is especially possible when you get further into the game itself. Like one particular does allow you to have only the Ford Fusion stock car, and there's also sometimes where you'd have to buy the cars yourself. Yeah, while some occasions you do get to play these events with the car provided for you, other times you'd have to purchase it yourself with the money in particular that you earn from these races, or from gathering enough XP, as there is a progression system which every time you pass it, you get a good amount of money, usually up to $20,000. And this money in particular is used mainly for purchasing other cars. And occasionally, you can also use them for upgrades. These upgrades in particular can sometimes be of a great help, no matter the situation. And there's definitely a lot of other good variables about this game that sure do feed off of a lot of our tendencies. Having a more RPG style to a racing game like this, a racing game that is pretty different from the standard fare that we recognize, like Need for Speed or Gran Turismo, anything that gives us the more contemporary vibe that we recognize from almost all racing games. Because of course, it's not just the fact that you have track racing with most road legal cars, but there's also the addition of other cars. I mean, there's F1 cars, there's the Super Truck, which are basically like off-roaders. There's also some other pieces in mind. But unlike the Crew Motorfest, as well as like the Crew in general, Project Cars doesn't necessarily go for motorcycles, boats, and planes, which may be for the best. I'm sure not everybody's going to want to go all out like the Crew does. In any case though, my whole experience with the game so far is just amazing. The challenge alone is something that you really got to get used to. Because while you can fiddle around with the difficulty, mainly through putting in mods, tunings, as well as other settings that you can implement before the race starts, the one catch you'd have to remember is that it can mess with your XP bonus multiplier. Yeah, you can essentially get up to a 20% XP bonus, depending on how difficult you want the race to be. In my situation, I've mostly let it fall between anywhere from 6 to 10%, which already is a pretty good leveler, if you ask me. I don't need it to be all the way up at 20, because that kind of difficulty just enrages me. The challenge alone that I already put in with the 10% range of XP bonus multipliers doesn't exactly chalk up to my level of skill either, because while I am already a pretty good star at racing games, even being confident enough to move up difficulties by this point in time, it's safe to say I'm still not an expert at these sort of games. I'd say that if I'm talking about a game that I'm already so good at, it would probably be more about survival, like Minecraft or Ark. You know, those kind of games I'm so good at that I can pretty much just go at the highest difficulty at all times, and still, it feels super easy to deal with. But hey, don't take my word for it. Go play the games yourself if you want to. Project Cars 3, by any means, is still a great series, and kind of sucks we'll probably never get to see a part 4 and all this. But I guess the benefit of that is that while Project Cars 3, it does a really good job as a racing game, including a lot of variety in tracks as well as car models. There's even cars I have actually not seen before used in video games. Like, have you ever heard of the KTM Expo race car? I mean, KTM? It's impressive that they were able to make it to the game anyways, but they have their own race car. That's something I've never actually seen before. Oh wait, but what about if we talked about the Lamborghini Sian? Yeah, was that even in the Crew Motorfest, for instance, which came out 3 years later? I can't say that was. I mean, they had a bunch of other models there, like the Urus, the Diablo, and the Aventador, and even some powerful new electric Lambos. But I don't recall the Sian being a part of it. And then, of course, there's other models in there that I also had not seen before in racing games. So you know what? Project Cars 3, especially with all the DLCs that have come out since then, with some of the more recent ones dating back to around 2022, it's just amazing. They were able to give us a lot of new content to work with, and some cars and whatnot were only made purchasable because the DLCs. I'd say that's a good $30 extra well spent across the board. And I will say that if I revisit the game ever again, I'll certainly have a lot more to work with. Because the DLCs alone tend to add up a lot of extra time to this whole thing. So far, my total playthrough of the game itself, from start to my most current point, I still have kind of a long way to go before I beat the whole game itself. And I've played through almost 32 hours worth of gameplay. I'm sure that even without all the DLCs and extra stuff that I paid for, I still would have gotten a good amount of playtime out of it, which really is saying something here. And it also goes to show that this is definitely one of those games that I more or less got my money's worth. I could still pick up a good copy for the PS4, or even buy it on the PlayStation Store and just download it from my PS5, which I doubt will be any different. And I don't even know if they've ever made a PS5 version, but that would be a great thing to try. I mean, I don't quite know if they plan on doing anything for the Crew or Project Cars series and their older titles, having them remastered for the PS5, but if they do, then I guess it'll be something worth trying out. Because Project Cars 3 and the Crew Motorfest are so far the only entries from either series that I've ever played. And I don't quite know if I'd be able to get to the older ones. But overall, with the variety in cars, tracks, the unique challenges and conditions, And all of the other stuff that has been put together, even the customization is pretty unique. Though not quite as sophisticated as such racing game series like The Crew or Hot Wheels Unleashed, where you can literally get into community liveries. Yeah, liveries that people have custom made. Project Cars 3 doesn't really have that, unfortunately. But I'm sure someday we'll have to look into more of this sort of detail here. Anyway you look at it though, Project Cars 3, despite being technically the actual send-off of the series itself as Part 4, is no longer of production or even of consideration. It's still a great racing game for what it is. I more than get my money's worth out of it, in spite of spending a total of about $131 out of it. Because it's not just from the main game itself, but also from the DLCs and other extras that I purchased for it. I'd say I've gotten a good amount of money's worth out of the game itself. And the playtime itself just chalks up to the fact that while I still have a long way to go, it goes to show there's a lot more to it than I expected. So, my scoring for this game itself is going to be set at a good 8.9 out of 10.1. Not exactly a fantastic piece, as the Crew Motorfest had pointed out, as well as Hot Wheels Unleashed 2, but still, I'd say it does a good enough job to be almost on par with the others that I've discussed already in this series. But you know what though? Tomorrow I'm going to be coming around with some more, let's say, fighting. Because in more recent times, we were able to get out of more Dragon Ball stuff. It's appropriate that I even mention that. Dragon Ball and Project Cars have been handled by Bandai Namco in recent years. I might as well talk about it a bit more than I did the last time. Because the Breakers wasn't really a great way to bring back Dragon Ball for video gamers like myself. But you know what? A few months ago, they totally turned it around with their next installment. So, stay tuned for that piece. Make sure that you like, subscribe, comment, follow me wherever you can find me, and stay on the Hollywood side. I'll see you guys later on HJN.